Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, I want to talk a little bit more about perception because the way that we perceive people impact the type of relationship we have with them. Imagine that you are going to meet someone for the very first time, but you have heard a lot about this person and everything you've heard has been negative stuff. You are walking into this meeting apprehensively. You are walking into this meeting not really knowing what to expect. And the type of relationship you're going to have right off the bat with this person is going to be impacted by the negative things that you've heard of this person. And the same thing goes with God and our relationship with God. That oftentimes before we come to have a relationship with God, we've already heard so many misconceptions about him. We've already heard so many negative stereotypes about him that most of them aren't even true. But these negative stereotypes that we've heard about God impacts the way we view him, approach him, and even our relationship with him in the end. And so the way we perceive God, our perceptions of God is important. So let's look at three things about how perceptions are formed. The first thing is our personal experiences. Our perceptions are formed by the things that we go through and the things that we experience. Perhaps you went through a situation where, it was a really difficult place that you were in. You walked through a really difficult season and you weren't in relationship with God and you felt like God wasn't there somehow. And that impacted your perception of God and made you feel like God was a distant God. So our personal experiences will impact the perception that we have of God and of people. The second thing would be influences from others. The influence of our culture, the influence of Hollywood, perhaps the people that we hang out with. They may have a negative view of God. And because we are around that, it impacts our personal perception of God and ultimately our willingness to walk towards God. And the third thing that helps us to form the particular perception we may have would be misunderstanding of Scripture. This is huge, by the way. Perhaps you've never actually read the Bible. Maybe you just heard someone say something about one verse of Scripture in the Bible, and this, person made an assumption or interpreted Scripture through that one little verse without looking at the context in which the Scripture was written. And that allowed you to form a perception of who God is. I mean, the major ones that I can think of is, thinking of God as an angry God. Well, you know what? In the Scripture, God got angry sometimes. People didn't do what he wanted them to do, and he got angry sometimes. But does that mean that God is an angry God? Absolutely not. I'm a mom, and over the years, I get angry sometimes. When my child doesn't do what I want them to do, I will get angry. But does that mean that I am an angry person by nature? No, it does not. Right? And just as we as parents become upset when our children make the wrong decision or don't do the things that they're supposed to do, God is a father. He's not just any kind of father. He's a good father. And when his children mess up and take a wrong turn, yeah, sure, he's gonna get a little upset. But that doesn't mean that he is an angry God. So that would be, I think, a great example on how misinterpretation of Scripture, misinterpretation of the Bible impacts our perception of God. And so our perceptions are formed through our personal experiences, They're formed by the influences within our lives, and they're formed by a misinterpretation of Scripture. I'm sure there are a ton of other things that will inform the perception that we have of God. If you can think of something, just write it down in the comments area, and let's start a conversation on that. In Luke chapter 15, it tells the story of a son that goes to his father and he asks for his inheritance. Now imagine your dad's still alive and you want your inheritance now while he's still alive. I think it's a little bit outrageous, but he goes to his father and he asks for his inheritance. And the outrageous thing is that his father actually gives him his inheritance. And this son takes his inheritance and leaves home and goes to a far country and spends everything. He spends everything on a partying type of life. He does all the things there are to do, and in the process, the money finishes. And he gets to a point where he's literally sitting in a pig pen, and he is so hungry that he wants to eat the pig's food. And he thinks to himself, wait a minute, I have a father, I have a family. I'm gonna go back home and I'm going to tell my father, I just wanna be a servant. And he thinks to himself that even the servants in his family's or in his father's house eats better than he is and lives a better life than he is in the midst of this pig pen. And so here is the son that has gone away from home, and now he's returning home, but his expectation is that his father is going to accept him as a servant. And in fact, the opposite happens. His father welcomes him home as a son, not as a servant. He puts a robe on him, puts a ring on his finger, gives him authority. He's literally like, my son was gone and he was in a bad place and he was in the middle of failure, but my son has come home. And it is a picture of God, actually, that he is a loving, compassionate God who waits for his children to come to him. And he is the type of father that's willing to accept his children as they come back home with open arms. And so on one hand, the son could have gone home with the perception of my father loves me and my father is going to welcome me and my father is going to forgive me. Or he could have gone home with the perception that he did go home as, that his father was going to welcome him back as a servant. And so when we look at God, if we see God as a compassionate, merciful God, and if we look at him as a loving father that wants to just embrace his children and bring them home, then that is going to impact the way we approach God. It's going to make us want to go towards God, not shy away from him, not hide from him, knowing that if we walk towards God, we're walking towards a place of acceptance. And so we know that God is not angry. God is not indifferent to his people, but he is a compassionate, loving God. And not only is he a compassionate and loving God, but he is actively seeking to restore humanity to relationship with him. And so we have to be careful about our misconceptions and our perception and our mischaracterizations of God, because it is either going to hinder us from walking towards him, or it's going to enable us to boldly and confidently run towards him as our loving Father. If this video was a blessing to you, would you go ahead and like it, share it, be sure to subscribe to this channel, and come back for the next video. I'm sure you're going to be blessed by it. Thank you for watching.